It's good to see everybody. A typically warm November evening and day. It's really an honor to be part of an international delegation to Venezuela to see the regional elections, 23 state elections. It's about almost 2 weeks ago now. There were 70 representatives from 70 different countries. So I wanted to share a little bit of the spirit of the Bolivarian Revolution, where it's at in 2017, despite all the difficulties still advancing and building socialism in real life, in real time. So we can see the first slide. So we went to different polling stations. My group went to the state of Miranda and Vargas, and we visited 8 different polling stations where we checked out the technology and the equipment, and we're free to talk to voters representing different political parties. This was right outside of a voting station where a group of community leaders yanked me to the side and said, "Gringo." And I said, "I'm not a gringo, I'm a North Americano and an internacionalista." Don't get it twisted. And they said, "We want you to go back y dile a Trump que no somos una dictadura." Go tell Trump, as though I had him on speed dial, that we are not a dictatorship. So that was a very emphatic, poignant, beautiful moment. So I'm glad, I think Telesur started recording the exchange, and it was a very powerful exchange, reflective of the experience I had in Venezuela, of a people who support this social project and the advances that it represents. These were other polling stations. This was with another committee of community leaders in Vargas. And like I said, we were free to talk. You can see some of the other international representatives amidst the Venezuelan people. And what we saw was transparency. We saw very modern equipment. We saw really the antithesis of what's on the front page of the New York Times and the Daily News and what CNN says every day. And how important to see it with our own eyes, because if we went according to what our class enemy says, we would believe all this propaganda against Nicolás Maduro and the people of Venezuela. Next slide, please. This was the night that the election results were announced. Here you have representatives from different countries. Just about every country in Latin America and Europe was represented, and we covered all 23 states. Despite the economic war, the media war, which I'm going to go into a little bit in a second, the PSUV, the Partido Socialista Unido de Venezuela, out of 23 states, they won 18. The opposition won 5, but then because the opposition was so fractured, they didn't even assume the governorship in one state, because if they actually took the seat, they would have to admit that the elections were valid, and they were divided in terms of if they should actually do this. So this was the night of the electoral announcement. This was inside of the CNA when they announced the actual results up here. And the 3 of the states that the PSUV lost were border states with Colombia that are highly infiltrated by Colombian intelligence and U.S. intelligence, and have really been used as a battling ram against the revolution. This was the next day visiting of 23 de Enero. That's a very symbolic neighborhood, a super Chavista neighborhood. They call the cerros or the barrios. That's where a lot of the misiones sociales, the social missions, have been based. Next slide. There you see the campaign, the mobilizing, the victory, the spirit to win 18 out of 23 states. 63% of eligible voters participated. Compare this to U.S. presidential elections, which are always under 60%. Even when Barack Obama was victorious, it was less than 63%. So really, I think Venezuela has a lot to teach the U.S., and not the opposite, as the pundits might have us believe. So really what the last 19 years of revolution since Hugo Chavez first won in 1998, I don't know if y'all remember that moment. I was living in the Dominican Republic at the time, and the Dominican comrades were more advanced in their understanding of what Chavez represented. And they said, you know, when Chavez won that day in 98, they said, this represents a new trend, a revolutionary trend in Latin America. And of course, they were 100% correct. So I'll never forget that day. But in the past 18 years, the advances that have been made in medicine, in housing, all these different social benefits. So I thought this graph here really lays out to you the amount of spending now that the natural resources of the nation were in the hands of the people. This great change that it represented, not just for Venezuela, but for all of Latin America, because Venezuela inspires Ecuador and Bolivia and Nicaragua, and this whole leftward turn that we saw against neoliberalism beginning in the late 1990s. For the first time, women could serve in the military and could be commissioned officers in the military. So this is where Hugo Chavez is actually buried, and to meet with some of the cadre, the military cadre, to meet a revolutionary military and a revolutionary police. It's a very weird thing, because when we hear police, it's 100% the pigs, the enemy, you know, the oppressors, so that there could actually be a state. Not that the Venezuelan Revolution controls the state 100%, it's a little bit more complex, because in the rich areas of Altamira and Chacao, the bourgeoisie still has, the class enemy still controls the police. So it's polarized in that sense. But to actually meet Chavista military officers who are also young, and to hear them speaking about Latin American history and struggling against dependency and underdevelopment, that was my response. It was just sheer joy. You can hear the joy emanating from the front here. Go ahead. And when we walk down the streets of Harlem and the Bronx, what do we see? We see buy Heineken, we see buy Burger King, poison, in the words of Nas, nothing but poison. When you walk the streets of Venezuela, these are the types of images you see. Hugo Chavez, eternal leader, and then the next one. One of my personal favorites, this is on every block. That's our boy, that's our comrade Che. And what it says there, it says, no se puede confiar en el imperialismo ni un tantico, nada. Don't ever trust imperialism, not one little bit, never. That's the national slogan. And when 149th and 125th are laced with that slogan, that's when we can rest. Of course, Venezuela's internationalism is truly inspiring, because the nature of imperialism was to always divide and make sure that there was no connections between Cuba and Venezuela, south-to-south connections. What the Chavista project represents continued now with the leadership of Jorge Ariasa and of Maduro and so many other valiant revolutionaries. It represents the south-to-south unity, reaching out to Cuba, reaching out to Iran, reaching out to, in a world of unipolarity, that's why the imperialists fear Venezuela so much, that there can be this reaching out to China, to Russia, and that's why the rhetoric is so amped up. And there's actually Venezuelans who've gone to Syria to stand in defense of the Syrian Arab army against the horrific genocidal US-sponsored ISIS attacks against the Syrian state. So the Venezuelans have made the ultimate sacrifice in terms of internationalism. More images there of two legends of our time, Xi Jinping and Nicolas Maduro, and the fear that strikes, you know, into imperialism. And Pepe Mujica, referred to as the most humble, the poorest president ever of Uruguay, the first president to legalize marijuana, to refuse limousines and Rolls Royces. He rolled around his little buggy, known as a Volkswagen, truly a charismatic character. So this is what you see as you go around Venezuela. You see these types of images which evoke this south-to-south unity, internationalism. So I want to touch a little bit upon the all-out assault that imperialism has engineered against Venezuela. It's been really a three-pronged assault. It's an economic war, it's a media war, and then there's actual physical terrorism that you see on a day-to-day basis. The right-wing strategy for the past few months leading up to these elections was all-out terror in the streets. 155 Venezuelans were killed. 29 were burnt. 9 were burnt alive, many just because they were dark-skinned black Venezuelans or because they were suspected of being Chavista supporters. So the right wing resorted to the most dirty terror campaign in hopes that the US under Obama or Trump would actually physically invade. So it shows you just how unscrupulous the right wing, these reactionaries are. This shows you the Bolivar. There's been an all-out assault on Venezuelans' purchasing power. The Bolivar right now is at $1 worth 33,000 Bolivares. It's one of the highest rates of inflation in the entire world. The Venezuelans are really doing everything they can in leadership to turn away from the US, turn away from the dollar, repivot towards China, and back up their currency through different international deals because of this historical dependency on the dollar. But this is a graph from Dollar Today, which is really an arbitrary website. Who is anyone to tell the Dominican people that their peso is worth 1/43 of US currency, or to tell the Jamaican people? So it's something that sometimes we just assume to be somehow part of the market or somehow natural. Of course, the market is a euphemism. It's a fancy word, it's a camouflage for imperialism. So that's what's happened to the Bolivar in the last few years, and inflation is skyrocketing. So really the Venezuelan people are in this incredible pinch. So the fact that still more than 5 million Venezuelans came out to vote for the PSUV shows just how steadfast they are. Acaparar, hoarding is a huge problem because these monopolies are in the hands of a few elite families. There's really no scarcity in Venezuela. The products are there, but they very intentionally hold back the products. So these are the government raiding some of these monopolists to free up all these resources, because the strategy of imperialism and their right-wing lackeys on the ground has always been to create scarcity so they can force people to migrate and try to starve and suffocate people and try to really equate socialism with scarcity to win what Fidel called the battle of ideas. So we want to show you a clip. I queued it up on another tab. Oh, there you go. Let's just get the first 40. So here you're going to see, he's going to replay it, so you don't have to go backwards. You can just let it play. Oh, yeah. Me and the DJ didn't coordinate this before, but we're good. So this is a right-wing demonstration. They're called guarimbas, or riots. And this is a Venezuelan narrating what he witnessed. And the police are doing their job to keep peace at the elections. This was a few months ago. And then you'll see what the right-wing terrorism looks like as they plant the bomb against the police. And then what you can't hear in the video, the right wing, the demonstration over here, are actually applauding that the police were murdered. Well, there you see them there. So it's an all-out war, and I had these, deep discussions with the Venezuelan leadership and comrades. They really employed a strategy of poner la otra mejilla, turn the other cheek, which of course made me remember Martin Luther King. And you know how we feel about self-defense, but they felt like if they were provoked into all-out confrontations against those terrorists, then Trump would invade. So they had the police and the military had to exercise the ultimate discipline and not get provoked in an all-out confrontation, even when they were being murdered. Next slide. So again, images of what the victory represented for the people. We can go to the next slide. And I wanted to put the Venezuelan victory into the context of what's happening right now in Latin America. These are actually images from Argentina. I mean, Mauricio Macri, if you will, is the Trump of El Cono Sur, of the Southern Cone. And there's a huge revival of the anti-imperialist movement in Argentina. This is Cristina Fernandez de Kirchner campaigning a few weeks ago, and you just see the mass support for Cristina Fernandez making this comeback. Nicaragua is making really a leftward turn with the Sandinistas. Ecuador right now is in flux. Lenin Moreno is not the Black Lenin, to translate his name. He's turned out to be a historical sellout. And Rafael Correa now is grappling for the way forward in Ecuador. Of course, in Brazil, we saw what happened with the coup against Dilma Rousseff. Lula right now, they said if the elections were last week, Lula would have won by 20%. Hands down, untouchable. So the Party of the Workers is making a comeback in Brazil. So this victory in Venezuela, I mean, Venezuela has been the vanguard, or has been the spearhead of this Latin American revolution. So I wanted to give that kind of international context. In my final comments, I want to link it back to a struggle very important to us here in Harlem, and that's housing. Because as many of our teacher comrades can tell you, 1 out of 10 New York City public school students is homeless. Many more have experienced homelessness. And really, of course, in Cuba and Venezuela and these socialists, they've done everything to fight against homelessness. But this is kind of, it gives you a sense of the historical dependency in Venezuela and the inequality. These are the cerros, what in Brazil are called favelas, the more oppressed ghettos or neighborhoods. And the Venezuelan leadership has done everything to invest to create popular housing so that people's needs can be met. Go ahead. This is this was a capitalist building. It was one of their skyscrapers, and the government supported the community. It was a popular occupation. They took over the building. It's nicknamed the Torre de David, David's Tower, and every floor has community leadership. It's organized by floor. So imagine a government that actually supports the homeless in their struggle to occupy buildings. That's what you have in Venezuela, the polar diametrical opposite of what we suffer through every day. In the final image there, the goal before Chavez passed away tragically 4 years ago was to create 3 million new homes to try to de-favelarize or de-ghettoize these communities so everyone could have a dignified place to live. And this is one of the social projects where Nicolas Maduro and his wife actually went and stayed and lived for a while, because really the model of leadership over there is not like an untouchable, ride around in limousine leadership like we're accustomed to in the capitalist world. It's feet on the ground, shoulder to shoulder with the people. So these are some of the images. 1.7 billion, slight exaggeration, million homes have been built so far en route to the 3 million homes that they're building. These are some of the community organizers that we met talking about the social housing projects. And that's the presentation. Super inspiring to have been there. I'll just close by saying the Communist Party of Colombia and the Frente Amplio from Uruguay, that was Pepe Mujica's coalition, all these different revolutionary organizations from across Latin America and the Caribbean and Africa and Europe had sent representatives. So I was just all ears trying to absorb, you know, all these different Marxist, Leninists, and representatives from around the world. It was an incredible honor to be there.